Now, the Trey Young trade specifically, and we had a question from Rome 8180 about this, with the rumor mill that Trae will be the next player to ask out, which teams should actually consider trading for him, and what's a reasonable amount to give up. He's a tough fit in a lot of ways, in my opinion. He can't play off the ball, is possibly the worst defender in the NBA, doesn't seem to get along with teammates and coaches. I've actually defended his game in the past. I don't think you average 30 and 10 without being a great player, but this year has really soured me on him. I get all that. I still think there's it's almost TBD on whether he can play off the ball, but I get all of those concerns. Let's start with the asking price, and that's going to be up to Atlanta. If you're moving Trey Young, I think the reflexive response is to believe, oh, we're going into a rebuild. I don't know if that's guaranteed. They might look at this roster and say, well, why don't we recalibrate it around DeJounte Murray? But he's also, if you were going to rebuild, he's going to be a free agent in 24. It would make sense to just trade everybody, recoup a bunch of picks, and start over from there. Again, that gets a little easier to do over the offseason when there are teams that are more flexible. I don't know what call they make. And so it depends on that. If I'm Atlanta and I'm looking to rebuild, you do what Utah did when they traded Rudy Gobert and Donovan Mitchell. You can go the route of, well, we kind of want a young centerpiece involved, but we'll take all the picks and then either useful players or just players who are there for salary matching. And that's important. Malik Beasley's played really well this season. Walker Kessler's been great. Jared Vanderbilt has given them some really good minutes. Kelly Olynyk's been really good. Colin Sexton's been really good. They didn't make the trade with any of those players in mind as centerpieces. Walker Kessler was kind of like an extra first-round add-on. They did it for the picks, for the control of these drafts into the long-term future. That's what you do if you're not concerned with the present. It just so happened they got maybe an all-star this year and Larry Marketing too. If you're Atlanta, you could look at Mitchell and Gobert and say, I want something similar. Mitchell's been the better player this year. Trae would have been identified as the better player leading into the season. I think you ask for a similar haul. Now, if you're looking to just recalibrate the roster around DeJounte Murray, that's probably going to eat into your pick equity, where you're looking at teams to send you an impact player or two so that you can continue contending for 10th in the East or whatever, or thinking that you have a pathway to getting better. It doesn't complicate the trade, but it would open up suitors to maybe where if they're not super pick rich, it would allow them to join the sweepstakes, but then it would also hurt a team. Like let's say Dallas. Dallas would be just objectively funny to see Trae and Luka on the same team, but they could, after this season, feasibly offer after this season, assuming their first round pick to the Knicks conveys, they could offer a 2024 first, a 2026 first, a 2028 first, and then a 2030 first. We're talking about trading Trey Young for them when the league calendar resets. 4 picks plus 3 swaps. That is the meat and the potatoes and the dessert of their trade. They would be including salary matching after that. Maybe Josh Green and Jaden Hardy are in there, but that's the meat and potatoes of their deal, or all those picks. They immediately get bounced from the running if the Hawks want more established impact players. And so looking at these destinations, I thought about this a lot, and I didn't anticipate talking about this team in the first place, but I did on the first iteration of this podcast. Would Boston give up Jaylen Brown for Trey Young? Is that something they would consider? I don't know. If Atlanta was confident they could re-sign Jaylen Brown, I think that's something they would be interested in, pairing him with DeJounte Murray and Clint Capella and Bogdan Bogdanovic. I could see it. Boston, they had an historically great start to the season offensively this year, and Brown has been great, like caps lock great. But if the offense continues to fall off, or if they think they need more of a caps lock shot creator and someone to drive even the playmaking of an offense in a playoff final situation, and they don't believe that's Jason Tatum, would they consider it? I wouldn't at this point. I want to make it clear. If the season ended in less than palatable fashion for Boston, I'm saying, let's say they miss the conference finals and it's not even pretty. I wouldn't predict that, but maybe that's when they enter the fold. Brooklyn just doesn't have the juice to get him, and I don't think they need him. Charlotte really doesn't have the juice to get him, which is unfortunate because they're fucking terrible. I don't know why you'd want to pair him with LaMelo anyway. Chicago, I guess if Atlanta really liked something built around Zach LaVine and Patrick Williams and stuff, but at that point, if you're Chicago, what you're pairing Trey Young with DeMar DeRozan and then re-signing Vooch, and like that's your team moving forward. So no, Cleveland definitely doesn't need him. I mentioned Dallas again. They could trade when the league calendar sets 4 first-round picks, presumably in 3 swaps. That's to get your attention a little bit. If you're Atlanta, the absence of, we're getting back other good players in the process that we really like. Do you want Kleba at that point when he's coming back from injury, which sounds like based on the surgery timeline, he's probably not going to be back until May, which could be the end of the year. would they give up Dorian Finney-Smith and all those picks? I think you need Dorian Finney-Smith to kind of insulate Trae and Luka even defensively. But if you're going the picks route, yeah, Dallas gets involved. Denver is an interesting thought exercise depending on how this season ends. Could you build something around Jamal Murray? I wouldn't. The two-man game between Jokic and Jamal Murray is just divine. And so don't take the ball out of Jokic's hands when you have someone in Murray who you know can work off him. Detroit, if they put Jaden Ivey on the table, they just don't have enough extra picks. And it's like, that would be they would have to go Jaden Ivey and picks, and that would be the full-blown rebuilding mode move for the Hawks. And I don't know that you think you're good enough and even have the sample size with Cade Cunningham, who's going to be out for the year himself, to be like, oh, we're that good. Let's push our chips all in on what we don't know is even like any pairing when you're getting a megastar could technically be combustible. You feel more confident making it. Let's say if you're Cleveland and you're coming off a standout year and your process has been accelerated, Detroit's has not. Golden State, I thought about because, look, at the end of the season, Jordan Poole's new money kicks in, build something around Jordan Poole, Jonathan Kuminga, Moses Moody, and future picks beginning in 2026 and later. Does that catch Atlanta's eye? And you might just say, well, why would you have Trae and Steph play together? I will say yes, but Steph can play off anyone. And how much worse is Trae defensively than Jordan Poole? I mean, size-wise, Jordan Poole is going to be bigger. So there's that. But I wouldn't hate it. I wouldn't hate it if that's the move for Golden State. I would be interested to see it. They wouldn't be one of my favorite destinations. Houston, semi-interesting, but like, what are you giving up? You have all these future picks, hodgepodge of players that you could send out, but are you saying, okay, Jabari Smith Jr. and Jalen Green are untouchable in this, or you want to give up one of those guys for Trey Young? And if you don't have to give one of them up, how many picks is this costing you? And then Trey Young, Jabari Smith Jr., and Jalen Green, it just feels like you're trying to push your timeline too quickly in that regard. And it could end up blowing up in your face where by the time maybe you are ready to win, Trey has eyes for another team. But they have the equity to get involved. And if you're able to keep two of Eason, Green, and Jabari Smith Jr. and move, and I guess Şengün, if you want to throw it that way, the Şengün Trey Young defensive lineups would be horrific. But maybe, but I don't know. They could certainly use someone to drive the offense as a point guard, and I don't think that's KPJ or Jalen Green, but can Jalen Green can work off Trey Young, but do you want to bring in someone so ball dominant when you haven't fully explored, when you're probably not even maximizing Şengün as it is, and when you haven't fully explored Jabari Smith's offensive game? Indiana's a no with Halliburton. The Clippers just don't have the equity. The Lakers, they have, after this season, they can offer some picks that go out a little bit further, but 2 picks and 3 swaps, let's say, what they could get to, plus they'll have cap space, so like, and a small salary. It's not happening, Lakers fans. Trey could ask for a trade to the Lakers. It's not happening. Memphis with Jaws, a no. Miami, I initially thought was a no, but Bam and Jimmy Butler with Trey. So he's insulated defensively there. And then they have Jovic. And after this season, it gets interesting with the picks that they could offer. I mean, it's kind of interesting now, but they owe that 2025 first to OKC. Let's just say they can unprotect that, and OKC is willing to work with them. You can offer after the draft. So you would offer the 2023 player that you actually draft, a 2024 swap, a 2026 swap, a 2027 pick, a 2028 swap, a 2029 pick, and a 2030 swap. And so you can effectively offer, if we're just going to include the 2023 pick in here, but you're moving it again once the calendar resets, you can trade 3 first-round picks and 4 swaps. You have Jovic then, and you have Tyler Hero. Is there a deal there to be made? Even if you think that I'm wrong about the pick numbers, but 23, 27, and 29 is 3. You can swap in 24, 26, 28, and 2030. Again, once the league calendar resets. So 3 picks, 4 swaps, Tyler Hero's $27 million salary next season to play around with. Does that, I mean, if you're given the full pick boat, I'm probably trying to get Duncan Robinson off that deal. So you get to keep Kyle Lowry with Trey Young. You can also use Kyle Lowry as the primary salary ballast there. Does Atlanta think he'll stay for a year and that he kind of helps them remain competitive? They could look at it that way. But I wouldn't mind playing Lowry with Trey Young. It's an undersized backcourt, but I think it could work. So you also, if you need to get to the rest of the money to bring in Trey Young's salary, there's Duncan Robinson we talked about. Dwayne Dedman, you could throw that in there, or maybe even Caleb Martin's on the table. That's a player who's just super useful. Miami feels like a Trey Young sleeper. I'm not gonna lie. Maybe they're more obvious to some people than me, but that's the team that I'm almost in love with now. The idea of it. Let's see, would Trey clash with Jimmy Butler, who needs the ball in his hands? and Bam, who's been a monster this season, the Heat are very malleable, and so are their stars, Butler, Lowry, Bam Adebayo. I just wouldn't rule it out. Milwaukee's a no. Minnesota, people have talked about the Karl-Anthony Towns for Trey Young challenge trade. I don't know if Atlanta does that, because then you're recalibrating your team around Capella and Cat and DeJounte Murray. I'm assuming you trade John Collins as part of that deal. You would have to make more moves in the front court, and Minnesota is not going to have extra picks to give you. If they were willing to give you Jaden McDaniels, like maybe that makes it more palatable, but I do think Trey has exponentially more value than Karl-Anthony Towns, who cannot be moved till this summer, by the way. The Pelicans, no, I don't want to see them invest in a point guard who's not, if it was an A defender point guard, but you have Zion and CJ McCollum and Brandon Ingram. I just don't think you need to go that route. The Knicks, yeah, they'd be involved. I've wondered whether their assets are sexy enough. The conditional first round picks from Detroit and Washington, I think, sound better in theory than practice. They've also, look, IQ's playing really well right now. I think OB, before his injury, and he was going through kind of a rough patch, but he showed that he could hit the three ball. Those guys are approaching extension eligibility, and that's going to make them less valuable to their new teams. RJ Barrett, is he more valuable on his new deal to a team like the Hawks? That would be the big one here. I think RJ Barrett or Quentin Grimes are your single most valuable trade assets still, if you're going the megastar route. I don't know the answer to who it is, to be honest. Quentin Grimes has 2 years left on his rookie scale and might have some off the bounce stuff in addition to hellacious defense. Deuce McBride, not in this conversation, but he's definitely upped his trade value based off what he's done since getting some more playing time. I think the big factor here would be, aside from the Hawks' direction, because the matching money going out, if it's RJ Barrett, it really does help you. So how many picks would you be willing to attach to him if you're the Knicks? I mean, if it's not RJ Barrett, like, you're really going the super duper pick route with just some of your prospects, and you weren't willing to do that for Donovan Mitchell, who's a cleaner fit next to Jalen Brunson than Trey Young. Would Jalen Brunson be a part of that trade? How much does that impact the pick equity that you're sending out? It depends on Atlanta's aim. I think the biggest question, though, is how does Atlanta view the Knicks picks? And with the Donovan Mitchell trade, it was said, well, get the distant Knicks picks. You should short the Knicks future. That's always been the smart play. When you look at where they're at now, they're not going to get worse with Trey Young. And I think there were more questions about this roster because of what happened last season, even after acquiring Jalen Brunson, than there are now after seeing it in practice, seeing them lean into more playing time for the guys that should be playing, getting away from Fournier, getting away from Rose, et cetera, et cetera. Even experimenting with the Jericho Sims, Julius Randle, Isaiah Hartenstein front court. I don't know, like, why you would believe that their picks are going to suck when they're getting Trey Young. And if they get to keep, because they're not giving up both, if they have Jalen Brunson and or RJ Barrett still there after the fact, I don't know that their distant picks are going to seem as valuable as they might for other teams. Maybe it's just because they're the Knicks and they're viewed as combustible on the outside. I think they would be in this trade. I think the cost of getting Trey Young, unless Atlanta is in love with RJ Barrett, might be higher than people are expecting, because the Knicks, and this is a compliment, I do think their future first round equity has almost declined in value a little bit. Their own picks is what I'm saying. Perhaps I'm wrong there. OKC, one of my favorites here for that. They can't do anything until the summer when they have cap space, just because they're not, if they really wanted to, yeah, you go Lou Dort, Chet Holmgren right now. You're not doing that. You're not trading Chet or Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. You make them off limits in a Trey Young trade. Otherwise, I don't really know what the appeal would be. Do you make Lou Dort off limits? I think Atlanta's going to want him, and I don't think you should rule it out. I think Trae would be very insulated defensively long-term here between the way that Shai's played this season. Lou Dort could still be here. Chet Holmgren coming back. Is Josh Giddey still around? I think he's probably your primary. He's played well this season, and he's played better off of Shai and has made me appreciate his game more. I thought he was a very inflexible player looking at his offense, so he's impressed me there. But Ousmane Dieng, J-Dub, even Jeremiah Robinson Earl, even Pokusevski, if they keep him, they have a lot of disruptive defenders or defensive projects. I think J-Dub is going to wind up being an incredible defender by next season. Even Ousmane Dieng, rest in peace to his wrists. I mean, he didn't lose his wrist, but could we get him some sturdier wrist there, please? So you could very much inoculate Trae defensively. You have all these picks. If Atlanta's looking to go the rebuilding route, I think OKC makes a lot of sense. And you start with Giddey and you flesh it out from there, because you could go with the cap space they have, Giddey, a couple small salaries, and you're there. Now, does Atlanta want Lou Dort? That's a different discussion. I think that impacts the pick equity you're giving up, but they would be a fun destination. Orlando is a team that people have mentioned, and I think it makes sense. What are you giving up? Who's untouchable? Paolo Banchero, and are you putting Franz Wagner off limits in that deal? I probably would, just because of the picks that it's going to cost me. I want Trae coming in and playing with Paolo and Franz Wagner. Jalen Suggs is not off the table. The question becomes, how much is Jalen Suggs worth in this trade? And the answer is, I don't know. I view Jalen Suggs before his injury. You want to monitor the ankle. I felt like people were too low on him still, but he's going to be viewed, I would argue, highly internally throughout Orlando in trade talks, but not if you're a team like Atlanta. What does it cost if you're going the picks, salary, Jalen Suggs, and they could have Chumo KK. They could have, RJ Hant will be off the books by then. You don't quibble over including Cole Anthony if you still have Mo Bamba. Even if they want Wendell Carter Jr., I don't know why they would. He's really good. If they want Markelle Fultz, his salary next year is non-guaranteed. Same with Jonathan Isaac. They could, if you want to make the money work and Atlanta's just looking for flexibility moving forward, Orlando's a good partner. But if Suggs is the primary tangible centerpiece going out, what else is involved? How many picks? You have all your own. So if this year's pick is good, you have that Chicago pick this year. So those two first, if you want to give those up, that might be a good baseline with Jalen Suggs to ensure that you don't have to eat into the Franz Wagner being there, because you're not trading Paolo. I just think that Franz Wagner, who's been really good, is someone Atlanta would push for there. Philadelphia, no. Phoenix, I thought about it because Devin Booker can work off anyone. He's just absolutely spectacular. But would you be willing to say, all right, well, CP3 we think he's done, or we're going to move him in this deal and send him to Atlanta? And then the what if becomes, what if Atlanta drafted CP3, comes to fruition 80 years later? That would be pretty callous of them. They have all their own picks, but you're probably looking at, you need Atlanta to be in love with DeAndre Ayton, which touchy proposition because they have Capella, Onyeka Okongwu, and even John Collins there still. And then are you giving up Mikal Bridges? You can get to the money if you're going to include CP3. But yeah, it would be interesting, I would say. The defense with Booker and Young would be rough, but Booker's improved. And like I said, I don't worry about Booker playing off anyone. Portland's a no with Dame. Sacramento, if you want to build something around De'Aaron Fox, I just don't know. The vibes are good there. I guess if you wanted to level up a little bit, and reunite Trey Young with Kevin Huerter, and you could unprotect the pick that you owe them in 24 to open up your packages. But Sabonis and Trey Young, and then Kevin Huerter still there. You're giving up Keegan Murray in that deal. You're re-signing Harrison Barnes. He's a free agent this summer, so he wouldn't be a part of an offseason trade. I don't know. The Spurs, not really their player, and they're just so early into their rebuild. Toronto, yes. Trey doesn't fit Project 6-9, but if you get to keep Pascal, and then you say, we're keeping one of Anunoby or Scotty Barnes. And then so it's Trae, Anunoby or Scotty Barnes, and Siakam, and you're fleshing out your team from there. And yeah, Fred VanVleet maybe is a part of that deal. It would help the Raptors if it was part of this season, or maybe it's a sign and trade over the summer, because maybe Atlanta wants to remain competitive. Pair him with Murray and Capella and DeAndre Hunter. Like, that's an infrastructure that works. And if you were to make the trade this season, like, you could include Gary Trent Jr. as part of this. I would give up OG or Barnes for Trae. I wouldn't give up both. And so you go one of them. And I think I've changed. I'm not lower on Scotty Barnes long term, but Samson Folk mentioned this on Sam Bassini's podcast at The Athletic. I feel like sometimes we overcomplicate trades for superstars, where if Toronto could have traded Scotty Barnes for Kevin Durant, in hindsight, they should have just done it. I don't believe for a second that it was just the Scotty Barnes hang up, but I would say the same thing here at this point. You can make a case that they're less likely to take that route if it's Trae than it would be Kevin Durant. But I would give up one of Anunoby or Barnes, I think, for Trae Young. And then you have the other one who you don't trade with Siakam. Build out your roster from there. If Precious Achiuwa is probably not part of the package, you're going I would say, salary plus Barnes or Anunoby, and then picks is how you're building out the package. And it would help you even more. I don't know that you have to give up as much if Fred VanVleet is tradable. Like, if they actually want Fred VanVleet, and if Atlanta wants to compete, they might. Trae in Utah, not so much. I think, he'd be an upgrade over Mike Conley or Jordan Clarkson or Colin Sexton, but are you cashing in your picks for Trae Young? And Atlanta's probably going to want Beasley and or Markkanen as part of that deal. So that's just a no. Washington will probably fancy themselves Trey Young suitors, but unless they convey that 2023 pick to the Knicks, I don't see them having the juice to get there. And Trae and Bradley Beal, I think they could work, but I just don't know. I think other packages would be more attractive. My favorites, if you want me to ask for my 5 or 6 favorites, because there are a few that are experimental that I think I'd like, my flat out favorites would be I love Miami. All of a sudden, I talk myself into Miami. I love Toronto. I love OKC. I love Orlando. Those are the four that I love and think that they could cobble together. Might be different types of packages, uh, and most of them are better suited over the offseason, except Toronto could offer a better one now. And I also would. Boston's an interesting exercise, not one of my favorites, though. Just Dallas being in on Trae would be hysterical. So I throw those two just sort of tangentially into it. And those are just the 6 teams that I sort of eye. And I don't think there's another one that I'm forgetting that I'm in love with. It's really just New York. So, and I would like New York more than Boston just because I don't want to mess with what Boston has. So it would be Dallas and New York is sort of just, they would be in. I don't know if it's the best possible course for either of them. But I would want to see it is my point, even if it's a car crash theory. And just by virtue of what do the Knicks have to pay to get Trey Young, who is hated by the fan base, but will be immediately loved if he's traded there. And then, I mean, if I was going really experimental, Golden State, but New York and Dallas are in the one tier for me, and in the tier of my own of what I just would actually really like to see teams that could go after Trey Young if you move him, which I don't know the Hawks do, would be Miami, Orlando, OKC, and Toronto.